This episode of RealAg Radio is brought to you by Ag Expert. Go from field to farm with Canada's most trusted, most secure farm management software. Ag Expert keeps you on top of it all, no matter where you are. Get started for free at agexpert.ca.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio. Welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Shaun Haney, your host here on this Friday edition of the show. Hey, thanks so much for making RealAg Radio and Rural Radio 147 such a big part of your day. And a big shout out to everybody also listening out there on the RealAg Radio podcast. And encourage you to tell your friends, your family, anybody that you know that is interested in agriculture. We are there. We're a good spot for you to learn what's going on in the week. So really appreciate you joining us here or downloading us. It is very, very much appreciated. Today we are from really pillar to post. We are RealAg Issues Panel. And I'm looking forward to today's discussion. Today, our special guest will be Stuart Person. He is Senior Vice President of Agriculture at MNP. Of course, you can find out more by going to mmp.ca. But it's great to have Stuart taking some time out of his schedule. I know he's been traveling this week, so it is great to have him aboard to talk about some of the issues. We'll also be joined, as per usual, by Lyndsey out of Ottawa, Ontario, and Kelvin Heppner out of Altona, Manitoba, both, of course, with RealAgriculture. Looking forward to it. Yes, I'm going to make sure I ask them about if they're going to be watching the coronation here on, it's Cinco de Mayo here today as well. A lot happening. Kentucky Derby, coronation. We asked the farmers yesterday about the coronation. We didn't get a very good response. Maybe the panel is going to be watching the coronation. I won't be. I'll be watching, I'm going to be watching, I'm not getting up at whatever time it is in the morning to watch that. Nope. Maybe you are. But the farmers we had on yesterday, not so much. Not so much at all. If you have any feedback on today's show, we'd love to hear from you. Send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. Or, of course, you can call the RealAg listener line, 855-776-6147. I have a hunch, too, that there's a lot of topics to get through today on this RealAg Issues Panel. We may have a bonus section, a bonus segment at the end of the podcast. So if you do download the RealAg Radio podcast, make sure you stay. You don't just end at the end of the show. And if you're listening on Rural Radio 147, another reason why you should download the podcast and get the bonus stuff as well. Okay, let's take a break. And when we come back, we're going to get to the RealAg Issues Panel. We got a lot of stuff to talk about. We got some job numbers. We got a report from the Standing Committee on Agriculture. We're also going to talk about the power of artificial intelligence and whether or not we should be concerned as a society in general. And CFIA made a decision this week when it came to gene editing. Oh, and the Grocery Code of Conduct. Like I said, there's a lot of stuff to get through. We'll do our best. When we come back, you're listening to RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147. We're talking to Murray Purvis. He is the owner of ABJ Agri-Products. Hey, Murray, let's talk about this EasyJet nozzle. People are talking about it. It's getting a lot of attention. What are some of the features and benefits?
Well, since the case name system came out, what we found was you're using a state-of-the-art spraying system, but you're using an old technology nozzle. In other words, at higher pressure, 40 to 60, you've got a lot of drift. Those nozzles, about 25% of the droplets are driftable. Whereas with EasyJet, it's more like 2%. Then there's the other side. You end up with larger droplets when you drop the pressure to reduce your drift. So with EasyJets, you have minimal drift. You spray at 40 to 60 PSI, and you have optimal droplets.
Awesome stuff. Yeah, I encourage everybody to check out the website. That again is abjagra.com. Hey, Murray, really appreciate you joining us here today. Good luck with the upcoming season.
Great. Thanks, Shaun.
Oh, this is going to be a fun Friday. I am looking so forward to this. RealAg Issues Panel. We got a great one lined up for you. But first, I need to make sure I tell you all about Granubor from US Borax. Ask for it by name. Go to borax.com. One of the lovers of Grandy Boar and U.S. Borax is Lyndsey Smith. Lyndsey, how are you doing?
I'm doing so well. How are you, Shaun?
I'm doing very good. Have you been watching the hockey playoffs?
You know what I have? I'm actually surprised you're going to start there because I feel like it might be a bit of a sore point.
Oh, with both our
For
guests.
some.
With both the others. Absolutely.
Yes.
I'm actually surprised both of them showed up.
I'm having a great time because, my teams are winning. So
it's actually easier when your team doesn't make the playoffs.
it kind of is. It's like all the pressure's off. I can just enjoy good hockey.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Yeah.
That's true.
Feels that way. So our first very sad, or second, I should say, very sad panelist is Kelvin Heppner of Manitoba fame. Kelvin, how are you?
I'm doing well. I'm actually not that sad. Leafs have just run into an opportunistic team and a goalie that's playing out of his mind. He can't do it for 7 games, so they'll come back as they head to Florida. And also, Lyndsey, how is your team winning? They're not even playing. What are they winning at?
Well, they're also not losing.
Exactly. No, I'm cheering for Florida.
Oh, really? Oh,
They're winning.
Oh, jeepers.
Because the Senators are all on vacation.
Yeah,
Maybe
they've been golfing. They've been golfing
Yeah.
for quite some time.
Yeah.
No,
Boating.
I'm cheering for Florida, you guys. Come on.
They're all at Okanagan Lake boating and enjoying the sunshine is what they're doing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway.
Also joining us now, I know he is very worried. He's very sad. He is. He may have already packed in his optimism. We'll see what he has to say about all this. It is Stuart Person. He is Senior Vice President of Agriculture at MNP, based out of Edmonton. Hey, Stuart, how's it going?
Good. How are you, Shaun?
You sound very down. Are you okay? As an Oiler fan, you're down 1-0 against Vegas. All I've heard from Oiler fans since they won the first round is that they will easily beat the Vegas Golden Knights. What are your thoughts here?
Oilers in 5. We got them right where we want them.
There you go. Right where we want them.
For the record, the Oilers have not won the first game of any of the series they've been in the last 2 years. So we're slow starters, but we're big finishers.
Okay, there you go. Just build that momentum. You got them right where you want them. I love this.
Here, I got a question for you guys before we move on to agriculture. Do you feel if it was Oilers Leafs in the final, of course that would be something for Canada, like a great Canadian audience. But I've actually argued that it might be a real ratings bonanza in the U.S. because you have stars, right? You've got McDavid, Draisaitl versus Matthews and others. Kelvin, do you agree with that?
I agree. And the first round ratings, even though some of the big teams lost, the ratings, I believe, were quite strong for the NHL. And I've actually heard some other analysts share that same viewpoint, that like hockey analysts say that because of McDavid's name recognition. And you've got Matthews, who is, of course, from Arizona, and Marner in Toronto as well. You've got some big names and big personalities that the NHL has built marketing campaigns around. So, yeah, I do think it would be good for even in the U.S. in terms of having that matchup. Now, who would Canadians be siding with? That would be the question. Edmonton or Toronto? Where would the general consensus be?
I think inside Ontario, Leafs. Outside of Ontario, Oilers. Southern, for some of us in Southern Alberta, I would cheer for the Leafs.
For the Blue Jays.
Exactly. Shaun's already on to baseball.
That has not been a good week. I've been avoiding that topic here. That has not been a good week for the Blue Jays. The wheels have come off that bandwagon. It is not. Well, we're going to turn around against the Pirates this weekend. Okay. Hey, let's get to some ag topics. Kelvin, we got some Canadian job numbers. What did we find out?
Some more better than expected job numbers from StatsCan this morning. Just over 41,000 jobs created in April, net jobs created. The jobless rate stayed at 5% for a 5th consecutive month, and analysts were expecting about half that number of new jobs created. So about 20,000 was the analyst expectation. So, and a number that the Bank of Canada is going to be paying close attention to, the wage number. Wages rose 5.2% in April from April of last year. So that's about the same as it was in March. And so I think the Bank of Canada, Tiff Macklem, haven't been talking about another rate hike too much, but the pressure is still there given some of these numbers that came out from StatsCan today.
Yeah, we saw Australia earlier this week surprise and go up 25 basis points. They had previously paused. The U.S. The job report that came out today, 253,000 jobs in April, also blew away analyst expectations. and the jobless rate decreased to 3.4%, which is a 50-year low. So, yeah, if you... I think it's so confusing right now to be a central banker and try to steer through all of the noise of this. Stuart, you're around a whole bunch of money people all day. What are you hearing at the water cooler there at MNP about what happens with rates going forward?
Yeah, I mean, these are not necessarily favorable for interest rates to pause or go backwards. So I guessing we're staring down the potential for some more hikes coming down the road. And that's not great for agriculture, as we know, because we carry a lot of debt across the nation. And so hopefully most of that debt's still locked in and long enough to weather the storm here. But anybody who's floating is going to feel that pinch a little more.
Yeah. Lyndsey, this is one of the things we had JP Gervais from Farm Credit Canada on earlier this week, and we were talking about land rental rates and relative to land values. And and JP says outright in that discussion that he feels that one of the reasons due to interest rate that they've risen, that the land prices at some point here they have to sort of lose some steam. They have to cool off, right?
So yes, except for, we also have been looking at this economy and saying, we're moving the way we want to move. And then we get these jobs numbers that are not necessarily falling in line with what we think. And so, yes, there's certainly a lot of debt servicing pressure as those rates increase. But one of the key points that Gervais points out is that it's still about supply and demand, and supply, especially in certain markets, is still very, very tight. And so even with the increase in interest rates, there's still a lot of demand for not a lot of land offered, and that still is going to keep those prices, I think, higher than maybe we think they should be just based on interest rates.
Stuart, did it surprise you 40% of the land in Canada is rented by farmers? I admitted I was surprised by that. JP really wasn't surprised. How do you react to that number?
No, I think that would be consistent with what we would see amongst our client base. I think producers who have invested in land over the years, it's been a really good decision for them if they could cash flow those purchases. But yeah, no, I'm not surprised. And I think, one of the things we try to do at MNP is when we are advising on the business side is do our best to separate land ownership from operations. We really shouldn't be taking into account land appreciation as part of your operational gain for the year. That should be looked at separately, and you should be doing what you need to on that land to generate a profit from operations. And if the land appreciates as well as an asset you're holding, well, that's a bonus as an investor. But that also allows our younger farmers who are renting more land to keep their eye on the ball of, look, I'm using this land to run my business, to make a profit from the business, not a profit from just the ownership of land.
Mm-hmm.
And that structure also can help from a succession planning standpoint for sure. Although it makes sense as you describe the reasons why there's that number of farms that are running their farm that way. It's still relatively low, is it not?
Running their farm in which way?
Well, that they have a separation between the land, the investor from the operations.
Yeah, I think it's a mindset that you have to get into. You've had guests on your show that I think are very good at that. Christian Hebert would be one who's very, very well versed in that side. If you look, you don't have to go very far back, though. You go back 20, 30 years, and the producers who were exiting at that time, most of their net worth that they were exiting with was all in the value of their land. They weren't necessarily making significant profits, especially in the grains and oilseed sector in the prairies. There wasn't huge profits being racked up in equity being built on grain production. It was a lot in equity in land. But now, in the last 20 years, let's say, we've seen a lot more opportunity to grow businesses, be very profitable, and grow equity from the operating side of the business versus just the land appreciation.
Yeah. Kelvin, What do you think about this? Like, I think what comes to light here too is we talk a lot about, hey, know your costs, think about the margin. Like, we had a conversation with Brian Voth from IntelliFarm earlier this week talking about exactly that. When we think about thinking about things operationally, a lot of times we focus on the revenue and don't focus enough on the margin and the cost side of the equation, and knowing those things to run your business better.
Yeah, and that would be how, if we look to other sectors of the economy, that would be how other businesses are generally run that way. Whereas in agriculture, we still have the real estate investor aspect to our business that Stuart alluded to, and a lot of farms have had success on that side of the books, not maybe covering up some of the maybe not so successful aspects of crop production and the year-to-year net returns on that side of things. But I do wonder, getting to this rental piece, that in the conversation you had with JP Gervais of FCC, Shaun, how increasing interest rates and returns on investments in other areas, so whether it's GICs or other places people can put their money rather than buying farmland as from an investment perspective, how that's going to impact and play out in the land market. And don't want to talk about rising rental rates or that pushing rental rates higher, but are landowners, investors going to be expecting higher payments on land for that reason, not just because of higher crop prices, of course, leaving out the input prices also being higher, but just because they see opportunity to put that money elsewhere, and they'll want that land. Land has had a good return on investment, as Stuart alluded to, over the last number of decades. To maintain that relative return on investment compared to other investments, how's that going to play out? Yeah,
well, and it's sort of like how we complain about the funds when they push the market lower, like they have been recently, up until the last couple of days in spring wheat and Chicago wheat, for example. But we like them when they push the market higher or push land values higher, or just think if cities stop growing for a second and what that would mean for Southwestern Ontario and some of the values there, Lyndsey.
Well, exactly. And so this is one of the things, of course, that we think about. And quite honestly, there are many farmers here in Ontario who will tell you flat out that they're going to farm until they're done farming, and they will cash out to a developer, and that is their retirement plan. And rightly or wrongly, they have a city growing up around them, and that's how they're going to make their money. Realistically, I think Kelvin brings up a good point, and JP Gervais brought it up as well, that if you are looking at perhaps moving closer to retirement, and you're looking at sort of shorter terms of investment, you've been in land for a while, there may very well be very good reasons to move your money elsewhere. You can make good money elsewhere, and perhaps it is time to exit the land ownership side of things, because there is going to be, as far as profitability goes for cropping, there's a ceiling on how much you can pay for rent. So you may be running into a situation where farmers simply can't afford to pay more, and so that particular investor, landowner, is simply going to put their money elsewhere, make their money elsewhere, and then maybe that helps the supply situation.
We're going to take a break.
It becomes pavement.
Sorry. Oh, yeah, sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off. Sorry about that.
The other side, it becomes a strip mall. But anyway, that's the other side.
Well, we need another Subway, or a Dunkin' Donuts, or I would be okay with the additional strip mall as long as we get Jimmy John's in Canada. If that was the outcome, I'm like, there's a balancing. It's a net benefit here. Okay, anyway, we got to take a break. When we come back, we got more of the RealAg Issues Panel. Stuart Person of MNP, Kelvin Heppner, Lyndsey Smith, and myself, Shaun Haney, and we'll be back right after this.
Did you know that Pioneer now has a full lineup of Enlist E3 soybeans? Take a look at Pioneer brand Enlist E3 soybeans for the highest yield potential and for the best agronomic package and herbicide trait options. From the lab to the field, Pioneer brand Enlist E3 soybeans are the best in beans, period. Ask your local Pioneer representative about Enlist E3 beans.
Canola is more than just a pretty face in the prairie landscape. It's a big business, both here and around the world, that requires you to be informed and up to date on everything it takes to grow a successful crop. The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com has an expert library of video resources covering markets, agronomy, and more to help you grow a healthy and profitable canola crop. Visit canolaschool.com today. Brought to you by BASF Canada and Invigor Hybrid Canola. As you head out into the field this season, the Corn School's got you covered. Everything from tillage discussions, weed control info, field trial results, yield strategies, and more. The Corn School on RealAgriculture.com has the information and advice you need to help you succeed. Brought to you by Pride Seeds and BASF. Corn School episodes are available at cornschool.com, from RealAgriculture.com, or as a podcast from your favorite streaming service. Download the latest episode today.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio for the RealAg Issues Panel here on this Friday. Shaun Haney, your host, joined by Lyndsey Smith and Kelvin Heppner of RealAgriculture, as well as Stuart Person of MNP. Let me tell you about the 2023 Beef Improvement Federation Research Symposium and Convention. It's coming to Calgary in July. Yeehaw! Calgary Stampede time. Find out more information by going to beefimprovement.org/symposium. I know Kelvin is excited about that. Paige Holmquist on our team, I think, is also very excited about it. There'll be a lot of beef people at that one for sure. Make sure you check it out. Like I said, beefimprovement.org/symposium. We've been talking a little bit out here so far about business plans of farms and operations. And Stuart, I wanted to ask you a question about farm succession. Okay, there's been a lot of talk in the mainstream. We've talked about it on our show about some of the barriers to farms transferring to that next generation. And a lot of media reports talking about how there's this shortage of farmers. And I know during the commercial break, you were chatting about how you actually think that's not the problem, it's something else. Explain.
Yeah, I mean, as I would look around at the clients that we would deal with at MNP and other farms that I know and friends that I have, I feel like there are a lot of young people out there. You see them out there learning how to drive the equipment and working with the animals. I was at a number of county fairs in Ontario last summer, last fall, and seeing all sorts of kids. I think there's a lot of interest. The tricky part that we're going to be staring down here in the next 10, 20 years is the sheer investment requirement to operate a farm. And a lot of these family farms are, the parents will have most, if not all, of their money tied up in the farm. And so you've got a retirement challenge, and this isn't anything different. It's been this way for years. The difference now, though, is the numbers are a lot bigger, and the cost of living it continues to rise. So for somebody looking to retire, they need more money than they used to. Look at what a house costs now versus 10, 15, 20 years ago, right? So I think that's some of our challenges is where will the capital come from? Will we see farms owned by in the future will they become true family farms where all of the siblings become owners and one of the siblings is farming it? What do parents do in terms of strategies to provide in their estates to provide some sort of fair distribution out to their children who don't farm? All of those challenges will be there, and I think the margins continue to be they generally settle in at a fairly tight range in agriculture. So it's never been a super high margin business on pure commodity production. And therefore, if the young generation has to go out and borrow money to buy the farm from their siblings or from their parents, will they be able to service that debt and still make a living for themselves?
Yep. I think there was a time period too where if you were an off-farm sibling, there wasn't a lot of money there, and so or profitability or equity, and so it was sort of like, whatever, if Joe wants to stay on the farm, Joe can stay on the farm. Whatever, I'm doing my own thing. I'm working in the city. Now, as an off-farm sibling, you look at some of the values that we're talking about here. That's a crazy financial decision if you were to say that, and so the money gets bigger. It impacts people on farm and the people that are off farm. Kelvin. Yeah,
exactly. And Stuart made some great points there. The numbers have just ballooned, and margins have temporarily over the last couple of years here been pretty strong, but they're tightening up again. And how that seems to be the case, where over time margins return to kind of what's normal. And can this transition happen with the younger generation coming in? I would probably consider myself on that side of the equation here, and that is the question, where the capital needs are that much. They're quite a bit larger than what the previous generation had to borrow to get in or to get started. And yeah, where's that margin going to come from, the economics of it, and that side of things. I do think that some of this coverage that talks about a shortage of farmers, though, is connecting dots that don't actually connect in reality. There isn't a shortage, like Stuart said, there isn't a shortage of young people looking to take over farms. The demand is strong. It's the supply that's the problem here. And the competition for that supply is so strong that it's driving costs up. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this unfolds in the coming years. Again, it's something though that we've been dealing with in agriculture for decades. It's not a new problem. It's just maybe the scale is new.
Yeah. We also heard this week from CFIA decision that's been, I think the industry has been, and farm groups have been waiting for quite some time. That is a decision from CFIA in terms of gene editing. And Lyndsey, we got a decision that I would say the majority of the agriculture industry is very much congratulating, clapping, and applauding. Groups like the NFU not on side, but we have an approval for gene editing from CFIA. So that was a kind of a big milestone this week.
Absolutely. And so as we've been sort of digging into, and you're right, we've been waiting for this for a while. It's been under consultation for quite some time. We did get Health Canada's recommendation on guidelines last year, which essentially the initial guideline was to say this is non-novel. So gene editing, to be clear, doesn't add anything to a genome. It simply turns on or off certain parts of a genome that's already there. And that's a key difference. And so this week's announcement was the CFIA side, saying that they're following the science, and the science says that this is safe for the environment and for human health, and that it is non-novel. So in line with Health Canada's decision last year as well. So this gets us one step closer to gene editing or gene edited crops being essentially considered conventional breeding. And so that means that they will not be subject to the same rules and regulations as a genetically modified organism. And so actually paves the way for making this a much easier technology that can be moved into the plant breeding circles. So we're not quite there yet, but this was pretty significant for sure.
And so some of the audience is probably asking, what are the benefits of gene editing? Why would I be excited about this as I roll through the field on my planter or seeder as I'm listening to this show right now? And well, it just so happens that I asked Pierre Patel, President and CEO of CropLife Canada, that very question. Here's what he had to say.
The benefits of GMOs have really been limited to a few very large acre crops and limited to pretty big multinational companies. What gene editing does is it opens this up because the costs are so much less, and the specificity and ability to get a ROI is much easier. And so now you've got universities, you've got startups, you've got medium-sized companies that can play in this field and create almost field-specific requirements. So if a particular mill needs a particular type of flour for their specific type of pasta or bread, they can almost tailor that to the field level, and it's not hundreds of millions of dollars worth of investment. So that's what's exciting about, is that really the variety of potential new innovations that could come of this, and then the value added that comes from that, and all of the compounding effects of that.
So from the perspective of CropLife Canada, they're definitely Pierre was pretty happy in regards to this. Kelvin, who's not happy though, what's going on in Quebec? This sort of ties into, well, we've seen a petition. A lot of people have been sharing the video on social media about a petition to ban glyphosate. That fits very much into some of the narrative in terms of pushback on things like gene editing. I had heard from another official this week that, one of the reasons it's taken CFIA so long to come up with this info is because of trying to comb this over in Quebec in terms of some of the pushback on it. What's going on?
I think you've summed it up well. There's certainly immense pressure in Quebec, and our federal government right now, the Liberals, have a stronghold in Quebec that they want to protect, and there's this pressure from activist organizations. You mentioned the National Farmers Union, organic industry associations were all opposed to this decision that was made this week. And you mentioned the glyphosate petition that was presented in the House of Commons this week as well. That was by Liberal MP Jenica Atwin, who used to be a Green Party MP. She crossed the floor to the Liberals. She's from New Brunswick, and she actually introduced a private member's bill that's been kind of at a standstill. She introduced that bill last summer to ban glyphosate. And so I guess there's certainly the government realizes how unrealistic that would be to move forward with that. At least it appears to be frozen right now. But yeah, this there's pressure in Quebec, opposition to pesticides, opposition to technologies like this. We see the Environment Minister, Stephen Guilbeault, linked to some of these organizations that have these views as well. And Lyndsey, were you somewhat surprised? Minister Guilbeault, of course, from southern Quebec, in terms of her home riding, were you surprised how strong a stance she took in support of? You covered the press conference, the announcement this week. Were you surprised how strong a stance she took in support of gene editing technology?
I was not just surprised, pleasantly surprised, because, like, we have to recognize our agriculture minister, exactly that. This is her home riding, is in Quebec. And we know there's intense pressure, in her own backyard for things like banning of glyphosate or whatever. But one of the things I wanted to clarify, and it's exactly what we heard in the press conference, because she got the questions right out of the gate. First of all, they were all in French and there was no translation. So I'm glad I have some French that I could follow along. But all the questions were about how does this impact organic, conflating this with GMOs, essentially, the feeling from the people who were asking the questions, basically saying gene editing is genetic modification, therefore shouldn't be allowed. And the minister came out very firmly explaining the differences, explaining why this is being treated differently, explaining what the science says, and was very clear that something like gene editing can actually reduce our reliance or use of certain pesticides, fertilizer, and water, and that realistically we can use a technology like this to actually increase food security, not just here at home and reduce perhaps our input costs here at home, but in other parts of the world as well, and that this is a good technology. And so I was quite surprised, because realistically she's got a lot of this pressure right in her home riding. So it was, and she is of course French, and it's so well spoken though in explaining this in both languages. So it was pretty cool.
So Lyndsey, quickly, we still have one more hurdle to cross here, right? And yes, that's the feed use, correct?
Right, which you'd probably think, hey, no big deal. But then we get things like the Lambda Psi ruling from PMRA, which says, hey, you can use this for human use, but not for livestock use. Yeah. So there is that. But yes, that would be the final hurdle. I think Patel sort of said that, the Health Canada side pretty much sets the groundwork. So a lot of the data should already be there, that it should be a relatively straightforward, efficient consultation on the livestock side. And so we could see this approval perhaps by the end of the year, but all of that is a perhaps because it hasn't actually started yet.
Okay. Hey, let's take a break. We're doing the RealAg Issues Panel here on this Friday. We got Stuart Person from MNP, Kelvin Heppner, Lyndsey Smith, and myself, Shaun Haney. We'll be back right after this.
If you're involved in the agriculture industry, it's important to stay informed on all the latest issues affecting your business. At RealAgriculture.com, we offer fast, reliable news, information, and insights to help you keep on top of all of the latest in Canadian agriculture. Visit RealAgriculture.com and sign up for our free daily newsletter covering everything from news, agronomy, animal agriculture, and much more. Visit RealAgriculture.com/subscribe today.
Infuse some energy into your next corporate event, customer meeting, or conference with RealAg Radio, Canada's national agriculture radio show. Create a unique experience at your next event with host Shaun Haney, broadcasting RealAg Radio live on SiriusXM, featuring exciting guests, captivating interviews, and the latest news from the agriculture community. Contact advertising at realagriculture.com or call 587-787-1795 to book your on location with RealAg Radio today.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio. Shaun Haney, your host, joined by Lyndsey Smith, Kelvin Heppner of RealAgriculture, as well as MNP Senior Vice President of Agriculture. It is Stuart Person joining us here today on the panel. Really appreciate him taking some time out of his day as he prepares for another Oilers loss tonight. Okay, hey, Stuart, heads up, it's game 2. It's also Heads Up Seed Treatment. We got to talk about them. Protect your beans from rhizotonia root rot, white mold, and SDS with Heads Up. Visit your nearest Agrimart location or visit headsupst.com to learn more. I have fun with the reads. I really like these segment sponsorships. They are a lot of fun. Okay, Standing Committee on Agriculture, they have a report out dated the April of 2023. The subtitle is Feeding the World. There's a whole bunch of recommendations. I had an interview with Nova Scotia MP Cody Blois earlier this week that is up at realagriculture.com and on our YouTube channel. He, of course, chairs that committee. A lot of different recommendations. One of the recommendations had to do with fertilizer. And he makes a point, and I have some audio here, but Stuart, I want to get your thoughts. One of the questions that we get in our inbox a lot from the Real Agriculture audience is, why are we not shipping more fertilizer from Western Canada to Eastern Canada instead of, say, importing it from Russia? Is this just seems like domestic food security policy that we need to be looking at closer? Yeah,
I would agree 100%. And I don't feel like this is getting as much attention as it should. Some of the understandings that I've gathered are that there is a lot of regulation in Canada that is maybe not making it so attractive for the nutrients and some of those companies to go out and actually expand our capacity in Canada. So those are some of the hurdles that need to be looked at. And then ocean freight being as cheap as it is, it sounds like it believe it or not, it's still cheaper to bring in an ocean vessel from across the Atlantic or even further south of Europe and bring that into Canada than it is to put it on a train from, let's call it, Saskatchewan or Alberta. The one thing I did, we were brainstorming, a colleague of mine and I were brainstorming on this yesterday, and really, when you look at nitrogen, you need natural gas as one of the key components for making nitrogen. So, boy, if we had a pipeline that took natural gas from Alberta to Ontario, maybe we could generate or manufacture nitrogen in Ontario for producers, and maybe that would fix the cost part of the equation.
Great. Lyndsey, I don't know what's happened to Stuart. He's gone crazy. This is nuts. What are we talking about?
Absolute
common
madness.
Sense.
Yeah. So Stuart, you're exactly right. And these are things that, when we think bigger picture than just sort of the hot button item that, we want to make our constituents happy or whatever. When we think about, what should our strategy be, which I think is what this recommendation is trying to get to. So it's recommendation 9 in this report. It does also say to remove the tariff on imported fertilizer. But the second part is exactly this: as should we be exploring? Why are we not exploring? We need to be exploring. Yes, potash is needed in Ontario, but it's produced out west. It's not that far, guys. So nitrogen is one of them, but we are also talking about potash as well. So these are definitely things we need to be looking at.
And I would add that there is potash that rolls right through Ontario, or I'm not exactly sure which rail line it goes on, but it ends up in St. John, New Brunswick. Yeah. And goes out on ships. So it is possible, apparently, to ship potash west to east. But the nitrogen piece is
a little more complicated.
Yeah.
I just I don't know why we do this, and this reminds me of when it was Grow Canada in December. We did the kind of the discussion, the panel there at that conference with Carlo Dade from Canada West Foundation, Dave Smarden from Bioenterprise, talking about thinking about Canada more strategically. We treat the Canadian Shield like it's some sort of wall. And I sometimes wonder why we fall victim to this. It's really, really unfortunate. Kelvin, I got a question for you, but I want to hear let's hear what Cody Blois, MP from King Hans in Nova Scotia and also chair of the Standing Committee on Agriculture, had to say about this fertilizer issue shipping west to east.
when we look at the capacity that exists in Western Canada, I've asked companies, fertilizer companies that have appeared before the Agriculture Committee, how do we start looking at building self-sufficiency across the country? We have such great assets in Western Canada. How do we find a way to make sure that potash coming from Saskatchewan is supporting farmers in my area in Nova Scotia? Even if it takes some ability for government to get involved to help build the case, I think in a world right now, why do we want to be supporting countries around the world that are making war against peaceful countries instead of actually building that self-sufficiency in the country? So I think there's a bigger conversation to be had. And I know, and I can appreciate some of the frustration. I was on the ground in Ontario, but I think from moral high ground, we've got it right. And we do have other plans to try to help support farmers.
Kelvin, I think the government needs to start listening more to the Standing Committee on Agriculture. And a very bipartisan effort by that committee. He gave a big shout out to some of his colleagues from all the different parties that are on that committee. But there is, honestly, and he said there's too many recommendations. There's a lot of them in that report. But there is a lot of just things that should happen that I'm just don't have the confidence will.
Yeah, in many ways, this report is a catch-all. There are 22 formal separate recommendations addressing a lot of the big issues that we're facing in Canadian agriculture. And I believe the government actually has a timeline to respond. I think they have 150 days potentially to respond to a report like this from a standing committee. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of response there is or how fulsome that response is. On the fertilizer issue, though, I do have a comment or a question. I wonder how much of this has to do with emissions calculations and accounting. We know that the government and Blois wouldn't be the on this side of the spectrum, but some of the questions I think he should be asking his caucus colleagues, because emissions accounting is right there alongside financial accounting for many people, many of the MPs in the federal government right now. And I wonder whether they would rather, it's the same problem that stands in the way of liquid natural gas, LNG exports from Canada. We'd rather not have those emissions accounted for in Canada, even though it would offset coal usage overseas and have a greater impact on reducing emissions globally. We'd rather not have those emissions involved in that natural gas processing happen here in Canada. It's the same thing. I wonder if it's the same obstacle with fertilizer. We'd rather have those emissions happen in Russia or in Morocco or wherever the fertilizer is coming from, and not have it happen here in Canada. And even though globally it's not better for the environment or better for global emissions, but it's one of those. I just wonder if it's one of those unintended consequences around the way and the priorities that are put in place around emissions math.
This is the insanity of emissions math. Because the weight, let's just say what you're saying is correct. That is a total mishmash, lack of what is actually should be our priority. And so it becomes incredibly distasteful to talk about how you're thinking about Canadians in a broad context of all different wealth levels, and that's how your priorities scope out. Lyndsey, I have a major issue with that.
So, but also, I mean, I can completely get on board, and I think, and Kelvin, the snide remark in me wants to be like, how dare you suggest such a thing? But it when you think about it logically, this is what we should be doing, right? We should be thinking about overall what is actually the better move for emissions, what all those sorts of things might be. But it gets very complicated, and realistically, we can only control what's in our backyard. And if our math is such that we want to, add X minus Y, whatever, and we need to make the numbers look good, you can skew it any way you want, and away you go. And this is part of, I think, the problem with so many of these conversations is they're not really about the realistic attributes of, trying to make better, lower emissions decisions. They're about how can we make the numbers look good, and that doesn't serve the purpose here.
Yeah, and Stuart, the other part of this too is that there's also like in all of this emission stuff and the ESG, and which sort of my head starts to hurt thinking about this. But then there's like the cost on businesses to try to conform to what the rules are, and then there's like ESG auditing and environmental auditing and things like that. That becomes that's becoming a bigger thing too. That you've probably been through many different sessions internally at MNP talking about that.
Yeah, and I mean, I was in Ottawa this week, had a number of conversations with various folks on that exact issue. One of the number one concerns right now of the current government is food inflation, and that I think the concerns all of us have is all the changes towards moving to more sustainable agriculture and however you define that. What does that do to the cost of food at the grocery store level? I mean, as producers, we're price takers, so we are maybe not, we can't charge anymore, so it's going to hurt our bottom lines. But all throughout the supply chain, there is an impact of all of these changes that are going on, and the rest of the supply chain does pass the cost on to the consumer. And so if we are concerned about food inflation, are we factoring in what it's going to cost? And is there technology that still could be used in the future or that needs to be developed to keep those costs down? Do we need some more timeline to make this happen in a manner that it works for the food inflation piece?
Maybe AI is the solution. We'll talk about that when we come back. You're listening to RealAg Radio, RealAg Issues Panel. We'll be right back right after this.
Want to get the best out of your soybean crops? Whether you've been growing them for a generation or are just starting into soybeans, find what you need to know at soybeanschool.com. You'll see videos on growing tips, pest control, and much more from specialists across the region, all in one place. Easy for you to access from your desktop, tablet, or mobile phone. Maximize your yields by staying up to date with the Soybean School, presented by BASF, Pride Seeds, and Syngenta Canada.
Peter Johnson at WheatPete, RealAgriculture.com, and what an opportunity! Oh my gosh! You think you can't grow better wheat? You are absolutely wrong. We're going to show you how to strive for those record wheat yields that they get in the UK and in New Zealand. You can grow 150 bushel wheat. I'll show you how.
Catch WheatPete's Word every Wednesday on RealAgriculture.com or download the podcast on iTunes or Spotify.
Whether you're seeding, harvesting, or anything in between, the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com has you covered. Timely agronomic information from industry experts available online anytime. Give your wheat crop a good start and a great finish with the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com. Brought to you by C&M Seeds, Syngenta Canada, and the Alberta Wheat and Barley Commission.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio. This segment is sponsored by Koch Agronomic Services, makers of Tribune Nitrogen Stabilizer. Protect your UAN from all three forms of nitrogen loss. All three of them. Make sure you do that. Learn more about Tribune and other nutrient management, nutrient protection, and seed enhancement solutions at kochagronomicservices.ca. That's Koch, K-O-C-H, agronomicservices.ca. RealAg Issues Panel, Kelvin Heppner, myself, Lyndsey Smith, as well as Stuart Person from MNP. Kelvin, the Grocery Code of Conduct sucked up some oxygen this week in Ottawa. What happened?
Yeah, we saw the draft code. This is something that has been in the works. Industry and government have been working on this for years already, and the FPT, the federal provincial ministers, at their last number of meetings have been pushing industry to move ahead on this code of conduct. And we saw the draft code actually published this week, open for comment until I believe the end of the month. So a lot of details in here, and a lot of this has to do with improving the relationship and kind of the market power between different players in the grocery supply chain. And one of the bottom lines, though, is that it will not be mandatory. There are no fines or penalties, really, other than public shaming seems to be kind of the companies could get named for if they're not. And there will be pressure to participate in this code just from a industry perspective, like the perception aspect of things. That seems to be the main way that this will be enforced. So that's something that I think some parties, stakeholders will have an issue with. The goal is to have this code up for comment now until the end of the month, and then have it actually in place or ready to go by sometime around the end of the year. So, Lyndsey, have you followed it as well? You may have more comments on it to add here.
Well, no, I think you've summarized it well in that, and I highly recommend everyone go and dig into it. So I guess my I did go start looking at it, went to do like the consultation part. It's really, you have to want to do it, because they don't have sort of a do you agree, disagree, like an easy sort of survey. You really need to tell them, here's the part of the code I don't like or I do like, and what I don't or do like about it. So if you have a vested interest, take the time, but it's not an easy one to consult on, I'll tell you that much.
One of the things that I think has been maybe confusing around this whole process is a lot of the mainstream media coverage has framed this as addressing the rising price of food.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's not.
Linked to that, and that's not what it's about. It's about improving relationships between the supply chain participants and
transparency.
Transparency, exactly.
Yeah.
All those types of things to make the supply chain work better. In the end, I don't know if it will have a result in a lower cost of food. Maybe if it gives more market power to certain links in that chain, there might actually be price increases if grocers are forced to pay more at certain places, things like that. So we'll have to see how it plays.
Well, on that point, I'll make this statement. For that very reason, Kelvin, and the misconceptions of what we're actually doing here, I think this is the most overstated, overvalued thing that is being worked on in Ottawa right now.
Would you even call it a nothing burger?
I just don't see, like, it is taken up. I'm not saying it's not important, but
you realize what you're saying in terms of
I know. Maybe I shouldn't. Maybe it's not the number one thing.
Yeah,
It's just
Stuart, agree, disagree.
What do you think, Stuart?
I'll just say, Kelvin, to your point, we have a very strong food and beverage team based out of Mississauga in Ontario. Their perception of this, or their interpretation of this bill, is that in the long run, it should increase competition in terms of what products can go on shelves in the stores. That's one of the challenges they're struggling with right now. And if you have more competition and more products that can go on the shelves, that should drive prices down. So that is their long-term projection, is that it should bring more competitiveness, should drive prices down.
Yeah, but Stuart, it's not increasing the amount of shelves.
No, that's true.
No.
But right now, a lot of really good Canadian food manufacturing companies are shut out from a number of stores in terms of getting shelf space, and that's one of the challenges with them being able to expand their business and get in front of customers.
Okay, we're out of time. What I'm going to tell everybody is we're going to do a bonus segment about the artificial intelligence and how it fits into agriculture. That's going to be, if you're listening on the podcast, you can hear that. Just continue listening at the end of the show. We will have that bonus for you here today on this Friday. I got to, before we end the show here on Rural Radio 147, I do want to ask everybody, it is Coronation Weekend. It's also, I think, the Kentucky Derby. Is that right, Lyndsey? You're more of a follower of that.
It is.
Rescheduled because of the Kentucky Derby, apparently.
Come on.
The Florida Panthers owner also has a horse in the race.
Oh, well, that might have something to do with it.
It's kind of a big deal, you guys. Come on.
Okay.
Focus.
So, Stuart, you watching the coronation on Saturday?
No, I'm sleeping in, so I'm ready for the Oilers game Saturday.
Priorities.
There you go. How about you, Lyndsey? Are you watching it?
Likely not.
I thought you would have.
You know what? We don't have enough time to explain, but no, probably not.
And Kelvin, you would be the one I would most likely vote not watching it.
You'd be correct.
Who the heck is watching? I haven't had a single person all week when I've been asking him this. Like yesterday in the Farmer Rapid Fire was like, no. The only person that said, yeah, maybe was Jim Hale, but I think he felt that was sort of the answer he should be giving. But yeah.
I saw the ad last night. It said it starts at 4 a.m. Eastern.
Yeah.
So
like I'll probably be forced. Yeah, I'll probably be forced to watch some of it because I'm up at 5 and it'll be on the TV. But that's about it.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, highlights.
Okay. Yeah, catch it on TikTok or Instagram. The highlights later on. I said there's an Oilers game tonight. It is actually. You're right, Stuart. It is tomorrow. So, hey, Stuart, thanks a lot for joining us.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me.
That is Stuart Person, the Senior Vice President of Agriculture at MNP. Also, hey, Kelvin, have yourself a great weekend.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Lyndsey, you as well.
Thank you.
Oh, we had so much fun today on the show. Appreciate everybody hanging in there and, downloading the RealAg Radio podcast, giving everybody a little bit of a bonus here and appreciation for you making us a greater part of your day here on the podcast. So thank you so much. Please share the podcast with your friends and family and whoever has an interest in agriculture that you know. Today on the panel, we had Stuart Person, Senior Vice President of Agriculture at MNP, Kelvin Heppner, Lyndsey Smith, and myself. Now, we segued coming out of segment 4, and we never got to artificial intelligence. We kind of ran out of time, but I wanted to cover it. Now, there was an article in the Globe this week really concerning, talking about how, you know, it was a gentleman, his name was Jeffrey, I'm going to find it here. Houston, maybe, was that it? Hinton, sorry. Jeffrey Houston's a farmer in Western Canada. Jeffrey Hinton used to work at Google. He led the artificial intelligence team. He's left, and now he is sort of going public and talking about how concerned he is. Basically saying that some of these neural networks, the intelligence of artificial intelligence isn't so artificial. It may actually be even smarter than humans even now at this point in the early stage of this. We need to kind of pause. Kelvin, does this worry you?
Yeah, I still find it hard to understand a lot of the impacts of this and how far it could go. So it almost like gets into the theoretical or the philosophical realm when I'm trying to wrap my head around this. So I do wonder, I'm maybe trying to find reasons to be optimistic. And one would be, if there's people doing bad things with AI, won't there also be people doing good things, and they'll just be maybe a step behind, where we'll just have blips of bad things happen, but the good AI will catch up? I don't know.
Did you not watch Star Wars? This is what people did with the Force. Some people did good things and some people did bad things.
Yeah.
So, but isn't this the whole argument always with technology, that technology is agnostic? Technology is neither good nor bad. It is what you do with it, right? So technology itself, we're supposed to be, you know, it is what it is. It is not good or bad. I just feel like we have so many issues that we could be solving that don't get any attention. And then something like AI, which, yes, I can see some, even within, you know, the work that we do, I can see some positive applications and some negative. But I also feel like we have so many other things. Like, shouldn't we be putting our brain power into other things? Not just writing articles where no humans are involved.
Exponentially increasing our brain power in solving some of these things, whether it's healthcare or agriculture, or there is lots of positive potential here.
Okay, Stuart, how do you see this?
Yeah, I mean, I was actually watching Warren Buffett's interview this morning, believe it or not, on this, and you know, he calls it an incredible invention. He's a little unsure as to what it's going to be used for. I think I would follow him on that. We've tried it out. I know in our firm we've been looking at it. We've tried it out on some things that we would do as business advisors, accountants, and it's in some cases it's not too far off. In other cases it's miles off. And so I think the tricky part is you're still going to need a human at this point to decide, is it right or is it wrong? And what it's telling you, right? And I'm referring to ChatGPT in this case.
Yeah.
So, but you know, I guess if it continues to learn and it gets there, you know, Kelvin, I had one producer tell me that they were able to search up how to rebuild an engine, and they thought it was pretty close on telling them how to do that. So I was like, wow, that's interesting.
Well, Kelvin was playing with ChatGPT, and he said, you know, which website is the best for agriculture information? And it spit back CBC.
True. Dead.
So, yeah, not very accurate. At all.
Depends on who you ask.
But it's all supposed to be getting smarter, so yeah, we'll see. But yeah, I do think there are lots of on-farm applications, and Shane Thomas, the guy who our friend Real Agriculture, who writes the Upstream Ag Insights newsletter, had an interesting article this week talking about some of the crop input kind of places it could be used, tank mixes, product uses, product comparisons. There are all kinds of applications. I see it on our chicken farm potentially in adjusting our feed rations potentially, or managing the barn settings based on data from historical flocks, that type of thing. More automation on that side of things. So to me, there are lots of places where it could be good. It's just if it gets into the wrong hands. It's not unlike other technologies, say nuclear. When nuclear was discovered, of course, the world has struggled to, or done its best to try to contain that, but it's also been a force for good in terms of energy creation.
Well, as long as the artificial intelligent robot doesn't have the nuclear codes, we're okay.
And let those two combine, I guess. Yeah.
Well, a company got my phone number. I don't know actually how this happened. Anyway, so I got this text from this salesperson, and this was a couple of days ago. And they're like, well, do you want me to send you more information, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, no, I'm good. I actually already have somebody that does this for me. And then they kept on coming back to me. And I'm like I got to the point where it was like, bleep off, right? Like, go away. And then I finally discovered I am talking to a robot. I am not talking to a person because they are clearly not getting the fact that I am not interested in this. From an accounting, like from a consulting and accounting standpoint, Stuart, like is a lot of farms and a lot of industries are looking at AI. They're hearing a lot about it, trying to understand it, and trying to, like, I've heard the legal profession is going to be able to cut a lot of costs out of their models based on AI, but it also may eliminate lawyers, period, because a robot knows the law way better than, say, a human could and be able to refer to cases and all that, from a case law perspective. How do accountants and consultants look at this?
Yeah, I mean, I would suggest it's a threat on definitely on some of the lower value work that we would do, both automation and AI. So automation in itself and just being able to create more algorithms and things like that. But at the same time, we're not. I don't think the at least the Canadian industry or Canadian sector is not flush with accountants at this point. We're all feeling that there's probably more demand than there is supply, and so it's not the worst thing in the world either. And I think a lot of us who are in the business advisory side of the accounting space would rather have more time to spend talking to our, especially in agriculture, talking to our farm clients about their issues and addressing those issues than being back in the office having to crunch numbers that maybe a computer could have done more of that work for us. Mm-hmm. So the higher value that we would provide as business advisors is actually in listening to our clients' problems and figuring out how we're going to help them solve those.
Well, I just saw a tweet. FYI, ChatGPT is old news. AI Chrome extensions are the next big thing in AI. So already ChatGPT is old.
Sweet. Perfect.
It's like trying to keep up with social media platforms, like I'm still on like Twitter and my kids are telling me like, that was like 20 years ago. What are you talking about, Dad?
Yeah. Join the party.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, I'll find it here. Just give me 1 second before we wrap up. You speak of social media. This week in the U.S., it's Mental Health Week. And what's really interesting here is there was a discussion that I heard on a radio show that I listen to frequently on the POTUS channel on Sirius on 124, and the Michael Smirkana's show, and they did a poll. It was talking about social media and what some of the impacts. And Lyndsey, you and I were chatting about this earlier.
Mm-hmm.
They asked 25,000 people voted in this poll, you guys, okay? Which poses the greatest threat to American youth? Okay. Guns were 34%. Tobacco was under 1%. And the number one was social media, 65%. And they had a lady, a doctor. She spent her life studying generational differences. And she was talking about Gen Z. And talking about how social media and the impact on young people, the youth, is creating great harm. She's actually lobbying and talking about how she thinks that social media platforms should be limited to nobody under the age of 16. The genie may be out of the bottle there. Hard to go back. But Lyndsey, this is a real concern. Urban parents, rural parents, and alike, it's a problem.
It's a huge problem. And again, to this point of, technology being used for good, bad, the technology itself and what it's capable of, it all depends on where we go with it as humans. And, we do have age limits on some of the platforms. However, you just tell it that you're older than you are and away you go. I mean, that's not that hard to get around. So I'm not quite sure how you even police that. But I would definitely say, I understand in this poll, it was generally what's the threat? And you get to define what's a threat. But I would say as far as mental health goes, as far as, how things go, even communication, bullying, even just how people use their time. I have a 15-year-old daughter and the social platforms they're constantly going off. You're supposed to reply. If you don't, it creates all this drama. And let's not pretend for a moment that teenagers aren't ridiculously awful to each other, but now you've got this screen in between you and all these other expectations and this speed of which you can share things, and it is a distraction and a absolute, it just bogs down, I think, society in general, to be honest, on how people treat each other on these platforms. Not the platforms themselves, how people treat each other on them.
Well, so, and we're off Rural Radio, so we could talk about this now, but the researcher said, which I found interesting, people in Gen Z are drinking way less. They're also having way less sex. They're actually like not taught. They're networking. They're getting together. You know, their face-to-face interactions with people are way down. And so maybe like this is, you know, and so people want to focus on the pandemic as sort of like the creator of all this. This was happening, she said, argued like 2007. So heavy issues, I know, to end the week on. But it is Cinco de Mayo this weekend. And that's what, you know, Stuart, this is your excuse to be like, this is why Daddy's having a margarita.
Yeah. That's
and
right.
tacos. Yeah. That's right.
What is everybody doing to celebrate Cinco de Mayo?
Having margaritas.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Nice.
Coronas.
Yeah, it's always Mexican on the menu tonight. That sounds good.
Yeah.
You know what? That's right. I got supper by myself tonight. The family's all gone. I'm that's what I'm doing right there.
There's got to be a really good Mexican place in Lethbridge somewhere, right, Shaun?
There has to be.
There is a couple actually, and I shall indulge myself. Hey, thanks a lot for hanging around for the bonus session, everybody. Really, really appreciate it. Stuart, have yourself a great weekend. Lyndsey, Kelvin, and once again, everybody, please tell your friends, your family about RealAg Radio and the podcast here. Really appreciate all the great content we have between the website of RealAgriculture.com, the YouTube channel, everything we got with some great podcasts wherever you get your podcasts. Mind Your Farm Business, The Successors, of course, The Agronomists on Monday nights that Lyndsey hosts. A lot of fantastic content, and we love your participation in it. That is for sure. You can send us your feedback, shaney@RealAgriculture.com, or call the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Thank you so much, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Radio, and we will chat again next week. Have yourselves a great weekend.
Thank you for downloading this episode of RealAg Radio, brought to you by Ag Expert. Go from field to farm with Canada's most trusted, most secure farm management software. Ag Expert keeps you on top of it all, no matter where you are. Get started for free at agexpert.ca.